All right, here we are in about week 7 or 8, I think, around midway through. As you should well know, we finished phase A and moving into phase B, as I put in the email and I've mentioned a couple times, and that's in the syllabus. Phase A, from my point of view, was that extended practice round of 7 rounds of making decisions, talking with your teammates, looking at the results, figuring out what those results mean by understanding the reports. So you're gaining understanding of those reports. You're continuing to talk with your teammates to figure out how to interpret those things. And then you're trying to make good decisions for the future. Ideally, not only while you're noticing how your team is doing, but also while you are noticing what your competition is doing. So all of those things are valuable parts of phase A and valuable parts of being a productive employee for your future organizations. So now we're getting a fresh start. You should have all new faces in your teams. If by chance you have not looked in yet, at the corporate lobby of BSG, you will see who your new teammates are. And as I mentioned in the email, I strongly recommend, encourage you to quickly get a hold of your teammates. And again, there are 3 modes to do that. You could use a ferris.edu email. You could use the messaging system within BSG. And I think in BSG, when you originally signed up, you gave them your email address. And I'm pretty sure that when you message others in BSG, it uses that email that you gave BSG during the application. And then the third approach to communication would be in looking at the Canvas. I think it's the inbox. You can send messages through that as well. And I think then that goes to your ferris.edu. So there's a variety of ways that you can be initiating this contact, and it's going to be important for you to initiate it. The vast majority of students during phase A were pretty good about being teammates, yet there were some that did not make connections. And I'm not quite sure what the explanation of that was, but I know there's lots of distractions. This whole COVID thing could be a factor. Internet connections could be a factor, but this being your capstone course, for most of you, that means that this might be your last semester and you're ready to graduate. And I think there's a lot of good stuff that can come out of this class by running and understanding that simulation, collaborating with teammates, especially now that we are forced to work virtually. Clearly, that's going to be the type of skill that your future employers are going to be appreciating that you have worked virtually in a collaborative team setting and you did well. So that's something I would strongly encourage you to get going here in phase B as well. Actually, it's not even a bad story in your interview to say at the beginning of this simulation with the virtual team collaboration, there were some struggles that I had and the other teammates had. But then as we went through it, here's what I did in order to make those collaborations and communications more effective. And in that second part of the simulation, the team did much better. That's a pretty good story to acknowledge that there were problems, but you did something about it and moved forward as a result. Anyway, I think we have the people and the students that are going to be here. What I am largely going to be doing today is might do some brief reviews of phase A, but not spending a lot of time on that. Just highlight a few things. Um, Also talk a little bit about maybe chapter 7, which I addressed briefly last week, and also chapter 8, which was, I think, last night's quiz focus. And then, as usual, briefly discuss the upcoming assignment that is also due this Thursday, aside from round 1 of phase B. Um, First off, what I would like all of you to do is in the chat area, I would just like you to type in one thing that you learned, whether it was a positive thing or learned by making a mistake through the phase A, something that you plan on trying to make sure that you either do again in phase B or you don't do in phase B. So go ahead and think about it for a minute or so, and in the chat area, just type in a lesson learned. Again, it could be something you made a mistake in or something that you learned that really seemed to pay off. So be curious about that, and I'd like to react to some of those. All right, keep putting those in. Looks like some very helpful pieces of information are going in here. And if by chance you have 2 or 3 main lessons just wanting to erupt out of your mind and then through your fingers, you can add more than just one. But let's start from the top. The whole idea of managing loans better. I think Jaeger put that in there. And there's a couple of different approaches on managing loans better. Part of it is not seeking the loans until you have a pretty good credit rating. Some teams didn't quite notice that they had a C minus credit rating, and yet they still went to get a loan, which tends to be pretty expensive. And I think I'd mentioned before that one thing I have done when I'm competing with the other faculty is sometimes if my credit isn't all that great, I'm going to work a year or two to get that looking good so then I can get a bigger loan to make some investments that I think are important. And then managing loans, there's always the opportunity, if you have a fair amount of cash after the fact, that you could pay off some of the previous loans. But again, you need to look at what interest rate are those loans, and so that has a certain interest rate, and then think, could I invest in something else within my organization that might have a better return on investment, ROI? And that's the kind of decisions that are constantly done in an organization. Should I put my money here, or will I have a bigger bang for that buck and higher return on this other area? That is going to be a set of important decisions that you'll be making. Another approach that I take to managing loans better is, so there were some teams in phase A that seemed to use the selling of shares of stock as their primary way of raising money. And that is fairly dangerous and has a negative hit to your earnings per share and your stock price. So with the bigger investments for your future, your organization's future, usually the loans tend to be the better route, especially if you have a respectable credit rating. From Krista mentions the equipment depreciating and just being aware that in either years 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, I can't quite remember which it is, but either the used equipment is going to all go by the wayside or the new equipment is going to go by the wayside. So there's wisdom in your earlier rounds starting to build up the replenishment of that equipment. So that is a great lesson to be learning rather than surprise. You might have 10 million space. You might have space to make 10 million pair of shoes, yet you have zero equipment to make it. That would require 1 year a pretty significant investment. So, yep, being aware of that is going to be very helpful. And now that you've all gone through it once, everybody on your team should have that in the back of the mind that we got to be prepared for that. And then from Logan talking about early differentiation is the key. I think we saw in the screen that's in earlier years, a lot of the teams were glommed together with number of models and also that SQ and price rating. And Logan is saying that there could be wisdom early on to move in a direction that is unlikely to have much competition. That certainly can be a wise approach. And what was interesting, this in phase A, I have a couple different classes and teams doing it, is some of the teams that were top had very low number of models, like under 100, and some teams had over 400 models that were at the top. So one or the other doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one or not the right one. It is how well you execute that plan, as well as how many competitors you have moving over there with you. So those are a couple of the things there. But in general, differentiation can be very helpful. Good point, Logan. And then Mitchell Blank mentions the concept of being aware in private label of some of the rules. And there's two important rules there, and I'm going to have 2.5. There's two important rules. One, it tells you in that screen what the minimum SQ rating that you have to have. So you can't be below it, and there's absolutely no wisdom in being above it. It doesn't make any sense to be above it. You only need what you are required to make. If you make a higher quality shoe, you are basically wasting money. That is not appreciated by the companies that are putting these bids out for your shoes. So again, the quality of the shoe is communicated and you need to keep that. And then certainly the price. And that's specifically what Mitchell's talking about. And that price has a certain rule that it has a comparison to the average price in that region. Make sure that you look in that private label help area about the price. And you'll need to do a little bit of prediction, but you can put in enough of a cushion that you should be fairly safe. So that is two of the things. The other half thing that I want to mention is that, let's say it says that you want to that you are required to have a 5.1 star shoe for a private label. Let's say that's the minimum. All right, you can go in and fairly quickly manipulate the 2 or 3 variables up at the top and create a 5.1 star shoe. All right, two things here. One is I challenge you to manipulate those in different ways to get a 5.1 in different ways. So it might affect SQ or the quality features. It might manipulate the percentage of superior materials. So you might go 42 and then 12, and then you might try 40 and 14 and 38 and 16. Do different ways of doing it to try to get to the lowest cost possible for producing that shoe. So you can still, there are multiple ways to get that to that 5.1 shoe. And you want to get to the way that has the lowest cost. And that's the same with your wholesale marketing or in your actually branded production. When you're creating the star shoe that you're making and you decide that you're going to be a 6.5 shoe, you can manipulate those 3 variables up there in probably 15 or 18 different ways to get a 6.5 shoe. You want to do it in such a way that your production costs are lowest, which means when you sell more shoes, your profits will be a little bit higher. So that is another thing. The other forewarning that I want to mention is that if you go in and do your private label, and let's say they want a 5-star shoe and you've created a 5-star shoe, and then you go away and you do a bunch of other things, especially in the production or facilities areas. Sometimes what you do in those other screens will affect your production and private label. So a heads up before you do your final save and you go off to slumberland that evening, go back and check to see what star rating you have in your private label. What's happened to me before, and as I've helped some students before, is we would create that 5.1 star early, and then we'd go do other things, and then we look back at private label, and it went down to a 4.9 or a 5.0. And sometimes that happens because we've changed the equipment, the machinery, we made differences on reject rates, or we did more training or something else in a different screen. That'll affect that. So again, before you do your final save, check that, that SQ rating and private label. Let's see, Jared mentions about being different. That's similar to the differentiation issue. That's good. The more specific bids on celebrities to get contracts. What I have seen over time is that there are some teams, especially in phase A, that are just busy enough with other things and they never get to any celebrity bidding. So they have zeros throughout the entire phase A. Frequently, I would say more often than not, they are at the bottom half of the performance amongst everybody. Usually most of those teams that have bid on celebrities and have higher than average bids on celebrities, they tend to be in the upper half of the total team rankings. So the celebrities can be helpful, use them strategically. And I think was put in here was more specific bids on celebrities. I'm not sure if Katie was implying that specific bid, instead of bidding 3 million or 3.5 million, you might want to do 3.541 million, because I've definitely seen times where somebody had a bid of, I think the specific one I can recall most recently, 1,500 or 1.5 million, and then another team did 1,501. So it was 1.5 million and 100,000 or something like that. So that adding that extra little bit at the end can be the trick that gets you there. And that same thing with the bids on private label. Instead of bidding $33, if you bid $33.24 or $32.88, sometimes that can be very helpful. Let's see, Shay mentions the whole idea that participation is very important throughout the simulations, and that is definitely the case. Those students that didn't participate much, they didn't get much out of it. Peer evaluations were not real positive, and frequently the teams didn't do as well. This simulation is complicated enough where pretty much you need all people on deck to be helping out and giving advice and looking at different reports and interpreting things and challenging each other. What too frequently happens is one person seems to kind of understand it, and then the other two just sit back, watch, and go, "Cool, sounds good to me. Sounds, yep, keep going, keep going." And that frequently doesn't work very well. And certainly the one or two people that are just watching what happens or wondering what happens are not getting nearly as much as they could out of this class. So participation is important. Then there's the whole concept of, similar with participation, somebody's saying, talking about interacting more with BSG and paying attention to the private label cost. Yep, there were some teams that were consistently, even at the end, if the maximum price that could be charged for a private label might have been $53. Some teams were doing the $68, $70, clearly showing that they were not looking at the help area of, that. So be looking at that. Let's see. Eric mentions to pay attention to market share and private label. Yes, that is a good point. And I think what Eric is talking about is some teams might want to try to sell a lot of shoes in private label, and they try to sell too many. There are rules within a private label that the situation may limit you to only 33% or 25% or 17%. And if you try to provide 50% of all the shoes to sell, you are automatically not going to be able to sell all that many. So in that help area for private label, it's going to be important for you to have an understanding that there could be ceilings of how many you can offer in private label. So great point, Eric. Andrew Riles puts out there that buying back stocks can boost your stats. Yep, that's stock buyback. That was one of the things that happened with the big tax cut of a year and a half or two ago that the administration put through. There was hopes that a lot of that money would go to creating more jobs and expansion of businesses. Yet a higher percentage of that money that came back to the businesses end up buying back shares of stock, which helped the stockholders. It also tends to help the CEO, CFO, COO, the C-suite, because much of their compensation or a significant portion of their compensation tends to be in stock options. So the buyback tends to be a significant aid to the top leadership's compensation package. But anyway, buying back shares of stock can help boost your thing. Also dividends. I don't think anybody has said that yet. Dividends is another part of that strategy. And in the finance area and that help area, they will give some very helpful suggestions and tips on what you should be doing with regard to buying back shares of stock. And then I know specifically on having a dividend policy that tends to be effective in boosting attraction and success of your company. Thank you, Andrew. And Mathis talks private label can be a great way to boost your overall performances. Yep, no doubt about that. If you have, there's two different approaches to be taking with private label. One is you focus and devote nearly all you can to branded, which is the internet and the wholesale. And then whatever is left over in production capacity, you try to sell in private label. That is one useful approach. The other approach is you want to have a certain percentage and market share in private label. So you make sure that you have some private label going on. And then with whatever is left over in production, then you try to maximize your success in the internet and in the branded wholesale. So again, where do you start? Maximizing wholesale and branded stuff, and then leftovers go into private label, or do you initially have a focus on some private label stuff, and then there should be a lot left over. Have a lot of that left over and try to find ways and create shoes that are going to sell in the branded. So that is very helpful. Nick reminds us about the dangers of equipment depreciation. You need to keep track of that, as we talked a little bit earlier. And Josh Jeffers mentions the whole idea of communication with teammates is important, which brings me to the point that one of your most important tasks probably this week for you and your team is to find a high quality way to interact, trying to find common times, trying to find a manner rather than just emails or text messages back and forth. But can you make that connection through the BSG website? If you remember in the lower left, you have those collaboration where you can, the first one on the right, I think, is you can share what your mouse cursors. And then the one further over, you should be able to talk. And so if you click on both of those, you can talk to each other while you're watching each other's mouse clicking. So basically you are all on that same page. So that is, the communication is very important. So a lot of great lessons there. I did mention the whole idea that in my 2 different industries this semester, as is usual in previous semesters, the top performing teams had very different strategies. Some had low models and were top performing, others had high models, and they were the high performing ones. So again, you can read on the internet about certain strategies that are the ones to go with because my team won doing this. Okay, well, that team might have won doing that primarily because that team's competitors were all doing different things. But if that person who won in a low model, high SQ rating, if he or she would have had more competitors up there, they would not have been in much of a first place and wouldn't be trying to sell their wares online. So nearly any particular strategy can be effective. It's how well you execute it. And then second, how much competition you have. And you and your teammates have a huge say on how well you're executing those things. And you should be noticing and monitoring how and what your competition is doing now and what they might be capable of doing in the future. So anyway, lots of tips there. Anybody else want to mention something else that they could think of above and beyond this? I think the one thing, and I might do some sharing of a screen here to make one more huge suggestion that I don't think too many people took advantage of. Okay, what just happened there? Okay. All right, I am going to go into somebody's screen. I don't think they are at all part of our group here. Unknown group, maybe I need to log back in. Okay. All right, the thing that I want to point out, and hold it, could somebody tell me, do you guys see this screen here? Somebody can give.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, thank you very much. I have gone minutes and minutes before when what I thought was happening wasn't happening. So, all right, so with this screen, the thing I want to point out has to do with this stuff right here. Get rid of that. I know I brought it up 3 to 5 times already, yet this can be extremely helpful. Basically, the concept here is that all of your numbers in every different screen here create different projections. You know, if you did something, if we change this to $58 instead of $48, we would have a lot less sales, obviously, because we didn't change anything about the quality of the shoe. We just upped the price by $10. So certainly you're going to cut demand. And if I did that, you would see things get more negative right here. Now, all of these numbers are based on these assumptions. These are the assumptions that we make about what our competition is on average going to be doing. So, and where do these numbers come from? Anybody? Anybody, where did these numbers come from? And if you remember, it's a 4, a 200 models, 48, 10. So the assumptions that we are making come from right here, this comparative efforts. So what is happening is these numbers right here, which basically is last year's averages. So last year's average, so if we just do a round, let's say you're going to do the round Thursday night, round 1. So whatever these numbers are, round 1, at the end of round 1, then those are going to go into the next round's numbers down here. So if the SQ rating next after round 1 is a 5-star, if there's 250 models, if the wholesale price is $52, if brand advertising goes up to $15 million, those are the numbers that will populate in here. And it makes sense. It's a good starting point for your assumptions to be based on. However, if you think over time that your competitors are going to be doing something different, that's where you can make some of these changes in the year you're processing, and your projections then may be more correct. I know I've talked about this again 3 to 5, 6 times. It can always be confusing. I would encourage you, in the help area of this screen, they will probably have some information that might be much better at clarifying what those means. So I would recommend that you use this, because this is basically more advanced thinking. This is now you anticipating what your competition is going to be doing next year and in the future. So as you slightly change these things in the anticipation, you're hoping that your projections end up to be more correct than if you just left these as is, assuming that your competition next year is going to do the exact same thing they did this year. It's probably not going to be happening. Your competition is probably going to try to improve and become better. So if you can do some of those guesses, that would be helpful. And let me see if I can. Yes, okay. Actually, this is your industry 37 from phase A. You can look at the regional average competitive efforts. Right now, we're focusing on North America. And you can see in round 1, similar to what we have right now, you've got 48, a 4-star shoe, 200. And this is what happened after year 1, what happened after year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see the trends that had happened. So if, my guess is last time, in round 2, everybody was did not meet their projections because there was a huge change in SQ rating. Everybody's numbers in round 1 of phase A was based on assuming next year there'd be a 4-star shoe average. In reality, it was a 5.2-star average. So anyway, these were some of the trends that happened. And as phase B occurs, every year it will be built upon another. So you'll also be able to see what seems to be the trends going on. And again, I think it'd be helpful if you were able to, let's see, where is the screen there? If you're able to manipulate these things. Again, that's higher level reasoning and thinking. It's a higher level BSG analysis. Yet I want to challenge you to try to take advantage of that, have some conversations about what you think the competition is going to be doing next year on average. All right, I wanted to point that out. Other things, I think I mentioned financials. Let's see, this is year 17, 16. Okay. Last week, I told you, let me see if I can get my other 38. Okay. financials. All right, one thing that I pointed out last week is that cash on hand at the end of the year, I want you to have somewhere around 15 million. To have 173 million, $280 million is a waste. And quite truthfully, there's a respectable chance that you'd be fired. Why? Because you could have bought back shares of stock. You could have given out dividends. The dividends actually are down at the bottom of this page. You could have been investing money into the future of your organization rather than just having cash on hand. So be careful about that cash on hand. And again, if at the end of your right before you're ready to save, you see that you are going to have a lot of cash, then you might want to go back and do some investments. You could invest in some of these improvement options. Now, again, make sure that before you just willy-nilly start clicking on things, that you read the help area, because certain options are better for certain types of strategies. So if you're going to try to maximize production, one of these is going to be better than the other. If you're going to try to have the highest SQ rating, one or two of these might be better than others. So align these type of improvement options with your choices there. Also, with some of that excess money, you can be building up here. You can be expanding in other regions, things of that nature. Celebrity endorsements, certainly you can be spending money. Keep in mind that if you win a bid, let's say you bid a certain amount of money for Kimmy Jimmel, and you win that bid, that particular year that you bid on it, you don't pay. This contract starts to be enforced the following year. So that money would not come out of this year's income. Keep that in mind. The whole idea of corporate citizenship. Some of these are more effective at having a positive impact than others. I've definitely read this help area. All right. So wanted to point out a lot of things and do some reviewing of big issues. And when you are looking at the results, I often, you need to look at the results to figure out how your team is doing and its strategy, but also you want to figure out what your competition is able to do. And to repeat myself, as I've said before, some of the ways that you can figure out what your competition is doing. Actually, let me look in here. Looking at the industry overview, this is a great way to see what you and your competition is capable of. Not only where have teams built plants, but how much equipment they have for this upcoming year. That is very important. Also, the other important area that I always go to is at each area. This is Latin America, but you can look at North America, see how teams are doing, see what's going on in private label, see what's going on in the spread. And again, here we are in year 17 with the big spread. But if we look back at year 12, you can see the big glomming that's going on. And as 2 or 3 of you had mentioned in the chat for your suggestions and lessons learned, the idea of differentiating yourself and setting yourself apart has a lot of wisdom. Again, year 12, that's what happened. Year 13, year 14, more spread going on. Year 15, significant spread. Year 16, you can see a couple teams popped out here just to really move away from the crowd, and a lot of movement there. All right. So largely, I think, finished what I wanted to be mentioning here. Are there any questions before we kind of put phase A into into the background and move to phase B. Any hopeful questions? All right. And certainly you can privately either send me those messages or stay on afterwards or something like that too. Okay, as I mentioned, phase B, communicate with your teammates, variety of ways to do that, get started. As we talked about, think about in the chapter 6, one of the last topics was, do you want to be a first mover, a fast mover after that, or a late mover? Some of you are probably talking about this. Let's go out and stake our claim to a certain area in here. Some of you might be saying, okay, well, let's just stay safe right now and see where people are going, and then we'll make our move. And so that'd be kind of the second mover, fast mover after the lead. And then some, and I'm not sure if it's actually a conscious policy or if it just ends up to be the strategy, is that they just kind of stay in a certain area and not make many moves, hoping that things work well. If you're going to stay in similar areas, I hope there's a conscious reason for it rather than just a lack of knowledge of what to do. Anyway, so that's phase A. The first round is this Thursday night in a couple days. And then we are going Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday. I think that Tuesday doesn't have a Thursday because that Thursday is Thanksgiving. And then we'll do rounds 9 and 10 a few weeks after that. All right, so that's the schedule. We're going to have some time to make this first decision, but then between Thursday night and Tuesday night, you and your team are going to need to get together, collaborate, have the discussions, interpret the reports, and try to make some positive moves for round 2. I don't think I need to mention that phase A only worth 25 points. Again, extended practice. Phase B is where you are being challenged to pull it all together, to put your nose to the grindstone, make sure you know your stuff. You might even want to be making sure your teammates are knowing their stuff and participating, because there's much more riding on the line here. Now, I do have the first peer evaluation in BSG at round 3, which is in a week from Thursday. So that's Thursday, November 5th. Will be the peer evaluations to be going on. And I would encourage all of you to make a good first impression, to know your stuff, be positive, and don't just say, oh, that sounds good, go ahead. Ask some questions about it. Even if you think it's a good idea, ask some good questions to scrutinize it. All right, that's phase B. Wanted to talk about chapter 8 issues briefly. Had the quiz last night. So diversification strategies, I think you're all familiar that companies frequently diversify. Just one, Apple at its origin was making computers. Certainly they have diversified into a whole lot of other things, and they've done it fairly successfully, largely riding on their design skills and the brand reputation. Those are two of the biggest resources there. But diversification goes on, and it should be part of different strategies. Let's see. Jack Welch, you might not have heard of him, but he was a pretty famous CEO of General Electric. And General Electric, especially back at that time, was made up of many, many different types of companies. And the one thing that Jack Welch was famous for is every company that was part of their package was a number 1 in the industry. And if it was number 2, there was a good chance they were going to sell it. or else get new leadership in there to try to turn it around. So Jack Welch was very clear about not carrying losers. I think Jack Welch also had the philosophy at the individual level, an HR policy, a performance appraisal policy, where every manager, now think of yourself, if you're a boss and you have 20 subordinates that work for you, you are mandated by Jack Welch to have at least 10% of them at the lowest level. You could have 10% highest, most needed to be in the middle, but out of those 20, you needed to rank them and get those lowest 10%. And then frequently the message was to fire them, get rid of that 10%, or if you were being nice, you could wait until the next performance appraisal, and if they were still in that lower 10%, then you end up firing them. From Jack Welch's point of view, he was very comfortable getting rid of the low performers and then replacing them with better performers. He thinks that over time, you get rid of that, you replace it with higher quality, that the average performance level is constantly moving up. That was his philosophy, fairly cutthroat. A lot of managers saw the success of General Electric back in the day and tried to emulate that performance appraisal approach. That was an interesting one. All right, couple things. One, there's two different approaches here. If you have one business, let's say we are thinking about Jets Pizza. So Jets Pizza does Jets Pizza. There could be that company could diversify. Let's say Jets Pizza wanted to go into other types of restaurants, that they wanted to buy a burger joint. All right, that's kind of a related diversification. Let's say they wanted to integrate backwards, that instead of buying their flour from somebody, they wanted to buy the company that made the flour for them. So that's a backwards integration in the value chain, but that's still related. So there's those type of diversification. So that's one company buying other types of things. Then there's the other approach of a company that's buying an unrelated. So if Jets Pizza ended up buying Lazy Boy Furniture, wow, where did that come from? Very unrelated, but it could make sense. One of the ways that that makes sense is if they were looking and forecasting that the pizza industry is not going to be doing too well, and it's only going to be earning 3% profits for the next number of years. But then they see the furniture industry is going to be earning 10 to 20% profits. Well, that could be a wise move, even though it is totally unrelated to Jets Pizza. To buy Lazy Boy Furniture, you could be getting a much more profitable return on your monies, as opposed to continuing to buy new franchises of Jets Pizza, anticipating 3% returns. So related diversification, you can see makes sense. It's a similar business or it's tied up in that business. Again, you can go backwards in the value chain and buy the suppliers. For Jets Pizza, it could be buying the company that makes the sauce. It could be making the company, it could be buying the company that makes the cardboard boxes for the pizzas. It could be the company that makes the ovens. So it's all kind of related as a supplier to Jets Pizza. Now that's backward integration and related. You could also move forward in that integration, and you could buy the delivery cars. And so you could have Jets delivery vehicles out there rather than hiring Grubhub or DoorDash or something like that. So that is integrating forward and related. But again, you could also do the unrelated types of diversification. And again, when I remember a number of years ago, I think General Motors owned Hummer. You're all familiar with the Hummer brand. Actually, there was a commercial just recently about a new Hummer, which was pretty freaky, all electric Hummer, 1,000 horsepower. It was an interesting new approach. I would recommend you look that up. But so Hummer, we're obviously familiar with General Motors and Hummer vehicles, trucks, SUVs. There was also, at that time when Hummer was doing pretty well, there was a clone called Hummer based on the Hummer image. I did not buy it. I did not use it. I don't think my wife would have appreciated it. But anyway, somebody might have. They also made a laptop, a Hummer laptop. Now you could guess to fit in with the image of a Hummer, it was an extremely durable Hummer, probably targeted to manly men that work in their truck. That would probably be the demographic that they were advertising to. But for them to have diversified, GM to have diversified into colognes and into laptops was certainly unrelated. So anyhow, a lot of this chapter is talking about different types of diversifications and why. For example, when diversification makes sense, and then the pros and cons of related versus unrelated diversification. And let me just try to find some things here. And I like these type of figures, and you can see that the types of strategies, do we want to go international or not? Do we want to diversify and strengthen in existing businesses? Certainly when General Motors bought Hummer, when Ford long ago bought Volvo, they were in the same business and just trying to strengthen their existing businesses. Again, moving into different industries. Another big part of this is divesting and getting rid of those units that aren't going to be doing too well, that aren't doing well. And, if you remember long ago, IBM used to make laptops. And also IBM does a lot of consulting. They make the servers, large servers for companies. And there was a point where laptop business was very unprofitable. There were a lot of companies making laptops, so the profit margins were being cut thinner and thinner and thinner. And that was the point where IBM decided, we're making about a 60% profit here in our consulting services, and we're making about a 2% profit in laptops. We just can't make money in laptops. The future doesn't look good for us to make money in laptops, so let's sell it off. And they did get rid of it, and there was a Chinese company, Lenovo, as many of you may know, ended up buying most of that laptop business from IBM, and then IBM centered on more of their consulting and larger hardware type areas. So it's also a big decision how to get rid of things. A huge effort in related diversification is to try to tap into cross-business value chains. For example, if Ford and Volvo go together, well, which of the assembly line systems is most efficient? If it were the Ford system, then they might have tried to change the Volvo method of making cars and used more of the Ford approach to using the assembly line. So trying to figure out within the value chain what might be most helpful, either greater performance production or reduced costs. And that value chain is, I think, shown a little bit further down, but let's talk about this. So there's diversification strategy options that we've talked about. Related businesses, you can go unrelated, you can do both. And then the other thing that I would put in here is to get rid of different things as well. So I think there's a fourth. So this chapter, and you had this quiz last night, talked about some of the reasons to go related. And then here's the value chain concept. If business A has the value chain and all of the stuff going on, and then they end up buying and acquiring business B, which has a value chain, you need to try to get synergies here. For one thing, you don't need two directors of operations. Frequently, you can uh, only keep one of them, so that can reduce costs. Plus, in each of these, frequently you have higher effectiveness and efficiencies. If business B has a outstanding sales and marketing department, they've got a great website, and they are selling a lot of stuff online. Business A, that might be one of the reasons Business A acquired Business B, was to access their expertise and hardware, software, their platform for that website. So this is the type of decisions that need to be made and scrutinization of the other company. And basic synergies is that concept. One big advantage of the unrelated, as I alluded to before, is I think I was saying if what we're doing now, I think I was using Jets Pizza, if we're only making 2 or 3% profit in the pizza business, let's go into something else that could possibly get us something a little more positive. And that's the whole concept of business risk is scattered. So if the pizza business goes down, then the Lazy Boy furniture business might keep us safe. It might still be doing well. So that's why if you do very different things, if one of them bottoms out, the other two could help you out. Similar to what I've mentioned before, similar to things that you've heard before, when you are investing in your retirement funds, it is not wise at all to put all of your retirement money into one mutual fund, or even worse, one specific company's stock. That is crazy. I mean, there's a chance that you may be a happy person, but a much better chance that over time that's going to be disastrous. So you want to widen your risk, and that's similar to going into unrelated diversification. Let's see. All right, those are largely the main points. Big two drawbacks of unrelated diversification. For one thing, the managerial requirements. A number of years ago, actually, Ferris acquired the Kendall College of Art and Design down in Grand Rapids. So here's Ferris, more of a typical university with lots of areas of expertise, but art and design and making furniture and jewelry and portraits and photography, those were not necessarily Ferris's areas of expertise. And this was before I came here, but I teach this stuff, so I was very curious about it. But when Ferris ended up purchasing Kendall, one of the wise things that I think happened is our president at the time did not get rid of the president of Kendall, because that's what's happening here with this managerial requirements. Our president recognized that he did not know how to run a college of art and design. And that's one of the main problems. A lot of CEOs or leaders that do this acquisition in an unrelated area, those leaders have this huge ego that think I can run anything. I am so good that I don't need their leadership. I can go in there, even though I don't know that industry or that area of expertise, but my sheer will and wisdom is going to help that acquired company do well. That frequently doesn't work all that often. Our president and wise leaders will frequently let that leadership at that acquired company stay there because those leaders know the industry, and just trying to weave in some of the synergies is the ideal. So anyway, one of the common errors in unrelated diversification is the acquiring company will get rid of the leadership of the acquired smaller company and think that they can compel it to succeed. And then the other major error is that just the synergies, the benefits aren't realized. Quite simple enough. So the 1 + 1 does not equal 3. All right, that's all I want to talk about in chapter 8. Let us talk about the upcoming assignments. Yep, that's us. Let me try to see the student view and what you guys see. All right. So what we have coming up this Thursday is the second self-assessment, and this is a good one. I thought the first self-assessment up here where you looked at the Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, and I think that's interesting stuff. Gets you to react to different issues about plausibly your style or not, agree with it, disagree with it. And the Myers-Briggs is something you've probably done many times before. Everybody kind of knows about it. One of the reasons that I did that is just so your water cooler conversations around at your organizations, people know about that. But the Big Five, with the openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability, neuroticism, that is one that more research is supportive behind that. So I wanted you to take simple inventory there and react to some of those things. So that's, I think, pretty helpful stuff. But to tell you the truth, I think the second self-assessment is going to be even more interesting to you. It is part of a section, part of a book that I use in my MBA class, small section of that. My MBA class is on leadership and organizational change, but it is from my point of view, it can be a mind-altering, life-changing exercise. So I hope you do spend some time and energy and mental energy with that assignment rather than try to crank it through as fast as you can, because I think there's tremendous substance in there. All right, so that's that assignment, and it should be there. Yes, so here is, this PDF is basically a little bit of a reading that you're going to do in order to complete the self-assessment. So that is that concept. And I think I've already got the chapter 9 quiz out there and available. As I mentioned last week, next Tuesday, we are not going to be holding our Zoom meeting because it's voting day, and I want to maximize the chance that you are going to vote. It's extremely important habit to get into. Most of you have probably already voted once at least, but anyway, very important to go out there and make your idea and vote known. And what I will do next this Thursday is I'll put out a video of a brief summary of the results of round 1. So you can be looking at that. I'll give some highlights, probably a few suggestions. I'll highlight some of the mistakes that were made. I hope not to see any mistakes on private label that you give too low of a quality of a shoe. And I hope not to see too high of a price that goes beyond the maximum price in private label. Those